I hadn't meant to stay that late. The cafe was almost empty, the air thick with the quiet hum of the espresso machine and the faint scent of baked pastries. Yet here I was, my notebook open, pen idle, because her presence made the words I'd planned to write impossible. She leaned against the counter, graceful as ever, the soft curve of her neck catching the dim overhead light. Mid-40s, flawless in a way that suggested both confidence and quiet weariness, she had this ability to occupy a room without making a sound. I'd seen her like this countless times, yet every glance felt like the first. Her eyes, warm and searching, caught mine across the narrow space, and something inside me clenched, a mix of anticipation and a gnawing, unspoken longing. "You're still here," she said, voice low, teasing, but with an edge that made it impossible to ignore. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, slow and deliberate, and I noticed the subtle tremor in her hand. A small, human imperfection that made her entirely real. I couldn't leave, I admitted, and my words felt clumsy in comparison to the steady, poised energy she radiated. My gaze drifted to her hand brushing against mine as she reached for a napkin. The contact was fleeting, accidental, yet it sent a jolt through me I couldn't name. She smiled, not the polite, passing smile she gave everyone else, but one that lingered in her eyes, in the curve of her lips, in the way her body subtly shifted toward me. I wanted to lean closer, to let that warmth settle between us, but I stayed frozen, caught somewhere between boldness and restraint. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, and I could hear the softness behind the observation, the way it carried an invitation I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. Her presence was intoxicating, the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating off her skin, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, just so. Everything about her demanded attention, yet demanded patience, too. "I'm just thinking," I said, almost too softly. She tilted her head, studying me as if she could read the corners of my thoughts. "You always are," she murmured, and I felt the truth in it like a gentle pull at my chest. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities, a delicate tension that made my stomach knot and loosen all at once. Her hand hovered near mine again, close enough that the heat from her fingers reached me before any touch could. My own hand itched to move, to close the distance that felt simultaneously unbearable and essential. I could sense her awareness, the small intake of breath, the subtle tightening of her jaw. We were both dancing around something unspoken, something that neither of us could, or would, name aloud. Then, just as the moment threatened to tip into something neither of us could fully control, the cafe door swung open with a sudden jolt. A rush of cold air swept in, carrying the sounds of the street, breaking the fragile bubble around us. She straightened instinctively, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, and I swallowed, my heart still racing from the proximity we'd shared. Her eyes met mine again, sharp, challenging, yet softer than they had been a heartbeat ago. She whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear, "Don't pretend you don't want me here." I didn't answer right away. I only let a small, knowing smile brush across my lips, the kind that admitted more than words ever could. "I stopped pretending a long time ago," I finally said. And just like that, the world narrowed down to the charged space between us, and I realized that everything was about to change. The street outside had emptied, leaving the cafe quieter than it had been all evening. We moved to a corner booth, both of us pretending the choice was casual, though every movement carried weight. I watched her slip into the seat opposite me, her posture perfect yet slightly hesitant, as if she were bracing herself for something she didn't want to name. I had glimpsed pieces of her past before, the subtle scars that lingered in the way she carried herself. A laugh that came too quickly, a hand brushing hers across the table that lingered just a moment too long. I knew she had loved and lost, that the world had asked for more from her than she could always give. And maybe that's why she seemed so untouchable, a force of grace wrapped around a quietly guarded heart. "Do you ever think about the people you left behind?" I asked, my voice low. The question surprised me as much as it did her. Her fingers paused on the edge of the table. She looked down, a shadow flickering across her features. "Sometimes," she admitted. "More than I should." There it was again, that small vulnerability hidden beneath layers of elegance. It made me want to reach out, to bridge the distance, yet I hesitated, aware of the risk. Everything about this, us, felt like stepping across a line society whispered I shouldn't cross. Age, perception, timing, all impossible things to ignore, yet impossible to resist. Her knee brushed mine under the table, a touch too brief to call accidental. I felt the heat of her skin through my jeans, a surge of awareness that made it difficult to think clearly. She caught my glance and held it, just long enough for the air to thicken, then pulled back slightly, as though daring me to cross that invisible boundary. "You're noticing things," she said, voice soft, teasing, and a little dangerous. "Things I don't show everyone." "I notice everything," I replied, my throat tight. "Even what you try to hide." She exhaled, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something floral and warm that wrapped around me like a whisper. A shiver ran down my spine when her hand rested on my forearm for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The touch was fleeting, yet it spoke volumes. Desire, caution, curiosity all tangled in one small motion. We stayed there, words thinning into silence, the kind of silence that spoke more than dialogue ever could. I watched her fingers trace idle patterns on the table, the way her eyes darted to mine, and then away, a subtle dance of invitation and restraint. Every moment was a negotiation, a fragile balance between what we wanted and what we dared to claim. And then, just as my pulse threatened to betray me, her hand brushed mine again. Neither of us pulled away. The cafe felt smaller, the distance between us collapsing. Electricity sparked in the quiet air, unspoken and undeniable, a promise that neither words nor caution could contain. For the first time that night, it felt like we were both waiting, suspended in a moment that neither of us wanted to end, and somehow, both of us feared might last forever. We had moved to a quieter street cafe the next evening, claiming it was for work, though neither of us opened a laptop. I noticed her coat brushing against mine as we walked in, a small contact that made my pulse spike. Every step felt calibrated, too close, yet not enough. She laughed at something I said, and I caught the edge of a smile that didn't reach her eyes, like she was holding back more than words could contain. Her hand brushed mine while reaching for a chair, deliberate enough to leave warmth behind. I didn't pull away, though every instinct screamed caution. Then, just as the tension between us became almost unbearable, a friend of hers appeared at the entrance. The cafe's quiet air seemed to constrict, and she stiffened beside me. Our proximity felt dangerous, yet neither of us moved apart immediately. I caught the flash of panic in her eyes, the quick adjustment of her scarf, and a hand hovering too long near mine before she finally dropped it to her lap. "I'll get the table," she said softly, her voice strained in a way that made my chest tighten. I nodded, though I felt like a fool, aware that even the briefest glance toward her friend could betray everything simmering between us. When she returned, the threat of being seen lingered, heightening everything unspoken. We sat opposite each other again, almost too close, shoulders brushing. Her gaze locked on mine, unflinching and steady, yet there was a hesitation there, a silent question neither of us dared to voice. My breath caught when her fingers lingered on the edge of my hand, a touch lighter than a whisper. "Do you ever think about crossing lines?" I asked, testing the waters, my voice quieter than intended. She swallowed, eyes dropping to her cup, a flicker of color rising in her cheeks. "Sometimes," she admitted, almost inaudibly. But then I remember why I shouldn't. I wanted to close the distance, to brush her hair back, to lean closer and feel her warmth fully, but the world outside our bubble seemed ready to shatter it at any moment. The hesitation in her posture mirrored my own, the shared restraint making each heartbeat louder, sharper, more urgent. Her hand drifted again, this time grazing my knuckles with a deliberate, teasing closeness. My breath hitched, my mind screaming to lean in, to let the moment claim us, but some invisible weight held me back. She tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that made my chest ache. A question, a dare, and a confession all wrapped into one. We leaned forward simultaneously, drawn by the same irresistible force. I could feel her lips nearly brush mine, the faintest whisper of heat between us. Then, almost as if reality itself had intervened, she pulled back, resting her forehead briefly against my temple. the tiniest exhale mingling with mine. We stayed like that, pressed closer than ever, aware of every thrum of tension in the small space between us. And in that silence, loaded with almost confessions and restrained longing, I realized something undeniable. We were both closer than ever, and yet, somehow, still resisting. The cafe had emptied hours ago, leaving only the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the windows. We lingered at the booth, faces close enough to feel the warmth radiating from one another, yet far enough that restraint still held us hostage. My hand twitched against the edge of the table, itching to bridge the distance. "You make it impossible to think straight," I murmured, voice low, almost swallowed by the quiet. She laughed softly, a sound that trembled somewhere between amusement and frustration. Her fingers brushed against mine as she adjusted the sleeve of her jacket, and the touch lingered, teasing, electric. My pulse hitched. "Do you even realize what you're doing to me?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her eyes widened slightly, the color in her cheeks deepening, betraying the calm she always carried. She leaned forward, just enough for the faintest brush of her hair against my face. The scent, floral, warm, uniquely hers, hit me like a physical force. Every nerve in me buzzed. I can't," she said, voice catching. Her fingers rested briefly on my wrist, hesitant, trembling. It's dangerous. Dangerous." The words settled between us, heavy, undeniable. But I couldn't move back. My body wanted closer, wanted the heat of her near me, the softness of her shoulder against mine. My hand lifted almost of its own accord, brushing the strands of hair from her face. She leaned into it, eyes fluttering closed for a heartbeat, and my chest constricted at the vulnerability she dared show. "I've wanted this for so long," I confessed, the words almost a whisper, vibrating against the hush of the empty cafe. "I've tried to hide it, tried to be careful, but I can't anymore." Her breath hitched, a small shiver running along her spine as she shifted closer. The distance between us had shrunk to inches. I could feel her warmth, her heartbeat echoing in sync with mine. Her lips were tantalizingly near, almost daring me to cross the final line. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice trembling, a mixture of fear and longing. "But the words hung in the air, unfinished, a fragile confession balancing on the edge of everything we'd denied ourselves. My gaze dropped to her lips for a moment too long, and I could see the same magnet pulling at her from the corner of her eyes. And then, as if the world wanted to test us, the cafe door swung open. A gust of cold wind spilled inside, scattering a napkin across the floor. She startled slightly, pressing a hand to the table, and I felt the sudden, sharp reminder of the world outside our bubble. Yet even as reality intruded, we remained leaning toward each other, suspended in that impossibly close, breathless moment. I could feel the heat of her body, the tremor in her fingers, the quiet urgency that made my chest ache. She began again, but the words died on her lips. And just like that, everything hung on the brink. A confession half-spoken, a kiss half-claimed, and the fragile line between restraint and surrender trembling beneath us. We had barely left the cafe when her phone buzzed, breaking the fragile bubble we'd built. She glanced down, and for a moment, her face went still, unreadable, tense. Then she looked up, eyes catching mine with a storm behind them I hadn't seen before. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice low, but carrying a weight that immediately made my pulse tighten. She stepped closer, but as she did, a hand brushed mine almost accidentally, sending a jolt up my arm. Her nearness was intoxicating, and yet there was caution too, something unspoken pressing between us. "What is it?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry, heart hammering. She hesitated, twisting her scarf in her hands, eyes flicking away, then back. "Someone overheard us," she admitted, voice catching slightly. "Someone who shouldn't know." And she swallowed, and the air thickened around us. "They won't forget." The words hit harder than I expected. A mix of fear, desire, and defiance surged through me. Every instinct screamed to hold her, to lean in, but the world beyond our tension reminded me this wasn't just about what we wanted. This was about consequences, whispers, judgments that we hadn't fully faced. I noticed the tremor in her fingers as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned toward me, but instinctively pulled back again, the push and pull between longing and caution burning in every motion. My hand hovered near hers, hovering, unsure whether to close the gap or respect the invisible line she drew. I shouldn't have let it get this far, she admitted, almost to herself, eyes flicking to the empty street, then back to mine. Her lips parted slightly, a breath escaping that made my own chest tighten. But I can't stop thinking about you. Her confession landed between us like a spark in dry tinder. I wanted to respond, to close the distance and let every ounce of tension resolve into something more, but the risk made it dangerous, thrilling in a way that was impossible to ignore. Every nerve screamed. Every glance held the potential for disaster, or something far greater. I stepped just a fraction closer, feeling the heat of her body, the rhythm of her pulse through her wrist when our fingers brushed. She leaned in, almost imperceptibly, as if willing herself toward me and yet stopping short. The tension vibrated between us, desire laced with fear, want tangled with restraint. "I've been waiting," I whispered, voice low, almost trembling. "Waiting for this for you." Her breath hitched, lips parting again. The streetlight caught her eyes, wide and shimmering with a cocktail of fear and longing. And then, without another word, she tilted her head slightly, letting the world fade out, letting the electricity between us surge. For a heartbeat, nothing else existed. Just us. The risk, the pull, the inevitability of the moment we had both tried and failed to resist. And in that instant, I knew we were on the edge of a decision that would change everything, for better or worse, and neither of us could step back now. The street was silent except for the distant hum of traffic, but the world around us felt impossibly small, as if the night itself had drawn in to witness what was unfolding. We stood there, mere inches apart, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the crisp evening air. My hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly, aware of the electricity in every subtle movement. "I can't pretend anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it carried a weight that made my chest ache. Her eyes searched mine, flicking over my face as if trying to read not just my thoughts but the truth behind every restraint I'd held for weeks. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. "Then don't," I said simply, letting the quiet command more than a plea could. My fingers finally closed the gap, brushing hers. She flinched just slightly, but didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, letting her shoulder brush against mine, the warmth of her pressing into me like a silent confession. The tension between us, the months of stolen glances and unspoken desires, pressed into that moment like a tide that couldn't be held back. I could feel her breath catch when our faces were just inches apart. Every heartbeat, every quiet intake of air, became a conversation neither of us needed words for. You know this could change everything," she murmured, her lips close enough that I felt the warmth spill onto my skin. Yet there was no fear, only a delicate balance of longing and honesty. "I don't care," I whispered back, letting the certainty in my voice give her permission to let go of the hesitation that had tethered her. "I've wanted you all of this for far too long." Her eyes glimmered in the streetlight, and I saw a vulnerability there that I hadn't seen before, a willingness to surrender to what we both knew had been inevitable. Her hand slid into mine fully, gripping just tightly enough to anchor us against the world beyond our bubble. I felt the tremor of her fingers, the subtle tension in her body that mirrored my own. For a long moment, we simply stayed there, breathing together, inching closer in a slow, deliberate dance of restraint and anticipation. Every glance, every tilt of the head, every brush of a hand carried more than desire. It carried understanding, trust, and the messy, human reality of what it meant to finally let go. And then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, she closed the final fraction of distance. Our foreheads touched, and a shared exhale passed between us. The world outside the street faded completely, leaving only the rhythm of our pulses, the heat of proximity, the knowledge that we had chosen, both of us, to surrender to what had been building for far too long. In that quiet, suspended moment, everything settled into clarity. We understood each other fully, the walls we'd built falling away, leaving only the raw, undeniable connection that had always been there. No words were necessary. None could capture it. We were here, together, and nothing, not time, not fear, not judgment, could erase the truth of what we had chosen. We walked slowly back to her apartment, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally grazing, as if testing the reality of what had finally happened. The city hummed around us, distant and irrelevant, as though it understood that the only world that mattered right now was the one we were creating together. When we reached her door, she paused, a faint hesitation crossing her features, not fear, but the weight of years spent guarding herself. I lifted her hand gently, brushing my lips against her knuckles, feeling the pulse beneath her skin. She shivered slightly and let out a breath, a sound that belonged only to us. "Do we start over?" she whispered, voice soft, carrying all the vulnerability she'd carried for so long. I smiled, squeezing her hand. "We don't start over. We continue. From here." Her eyes glimmered with something between relief and anticipation. I could see the trace of past hesitation, of everything she'd feared, dissolve in the warmth of that look. Slowly, naturally, she leaned into me. I wrapped an arm around her, careful but insistent, and she rested her head against my chest. The rhythm of her heartbeat matched mine, a quiet symphony of trust and desire. We stayed like that for a long while, neither speaking, letting the silence hold everything we couldn't say. Her fingers found mine, intertwining effortlessly, and the weight of the world outside melted into insignificance. Every inch of her presence was grounding, comforting, yet thrilling in a way that made my chest ache. "You feel impossible to let go," I murmured, tilting my head so our foreheads met. Her lips brushed my temple in return, a gentle, fleeting kiss that carried the promise of more, a declaration without words. She laughed softly, warm and unguarded. "I've spent too long pretending I could." I could feel her exhale against me, and I realized how long we'd both carried restraint, how carefully we'd measured every glance, every touch. And now, finally, the measure was gone. The tension melted into something entirely human, messy, intimate, and wholly ours. We settled on the couch together, side by side, legs brushing, hands still entwined. Her head rested on my shoulder, her hair brushing my neck, and I tilted my chin slightly to press a gentle kiss to her temple. We didn't need words. The closeness, the warmth, the lingering touches said everything. For the first time, the age gap, the social hesitation, the fear of what others might think, none of it mattered. Only this, the raw, undeniable connection between two people who had finally allowed themselves to be entirely seen. And as we sat there, quiet, bodies aligned, hearts finally unburdened, I knew we had crossed the line together, the line from longing to belonging, from desire to reality. The night held us in its soft embrace, and I couldn't imagine letting go. Not now. Not ever. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?